Just how far will a man go to avenge the honor of his family? Prepare yourself for one of the most notorious outlaws in American history. This is the true story of Harlan McCready. By all accounts, Harlan was a typical child of the mountains. Born in 1864, he was the eldest of 10 children who grew up along Spring Creek in Clinton County, Kentucky, just north of the Tennessee line. This part of the Appalachian peaks, known as the Cumberland Mountains, was a wall of rock and wilderness that kept its people isolated from the outside world. Folks, there were a hardy breed, self-sufficient in every way, still roaming the same animal trails and untamed ridges their grandfathers had walked since the days of Daniel Boone. It was here that young Harlan learned the art of survival. He became a true master of the wilderness, afraid of neither man nor beast. You might even say he was the wilderness itself. He had only 3 months of formal schooling, but in truth, reading and arithmetic were useless to him. Instead, he spent his youth perfecting the art of tracking and killing. He grew skilled with knives, guns, and horsemanship. In this way, McCready earned what mountain folk called a doctorate in survival. He grew up wild and strong. By the age of 20, he was a striking figure, tall, broad-shouldered, and powerfully built, with jet-black hair and piercing eyes unaccustomed to tears. He loved fine horses, strong drink, and women, and like all Appalachians, he was fiercely independent. For a time, life was good. Harlan worked hard, raising and selling hogs. He owned nearly 300 acres of land, his own little kingdom. He married, started a family, and settled into a life that seemed steady. But fate has a way of kicking a man in the gut when he least expects it. In 1852, a deal gone wrong set in motion events that would change the course of his life forever. It all began in 1858 when 2 men, Noah and Silas Harwood, came from Fentress County, Tennessee, into Kentucky looking to purchase 100 hogs from Harlan McCready on credit. The deal was struck, and the brothers promised to pay in full within 14 days. But when the deadline came, the Harwoods were nowhere to be found. Harlan went looking for them, and when he finally tracked down the younger brother, the man claimed his elder had taken all the money and vanished. Furious, McCready pressed charges against both for theft. At the time, it was common practice that when a man failed to pay a debt, a lien was placed on his horse until repayment. Once the Kentucky court issued such a lien, Harlan wasted no time. He rode down into Fentress County and seized the Harwoods' horses. But the Harwoods struck back, filing charges in Tennessee accusing Harlan of stealing their stock. With the law split between 2 states, the feud over hogs and horses was destined to be settled the old-fashioned way. Everything came to a head at a church revival along Lick Creek. Harlan attended, only to find the Harwoods there with word of a warrant for his arrest. In moments, a mob formed, shouting for mountain justice. Outnumbered 20-1, McCready mounted his horse to flee. Rocks rained down on him as the posse gave chase. He rode hard through cornfields and over fences, but when his horse stumbled and broke a leg, Harlan was left running on foot. The mob surrounded him, and a deputy sheriff shouted, "Harlan, there's a warrant for your arrest for stealing this man's horse." To which McCready replied, "That man stole 100 hogs from me. He'll get his horse back when he pays me." But the lawman would hear none of it. He dismounted and lunged at Harlan. McCready carried no gun, only a brand-new pocket-knife, sharp as a razor. In an instant, the deputy grabbed him. Harlan struck back, slashing 3 times. The officer fell, bleeding into the dust, while Harlan bolted. Another man tackled him, and a desperate struggle over the knife split Harlan's thumb to the bone. With adrenaline flooding his veins, he wrestled free and raised the blade high. But when he saw the terror in the man's eyes, he spared him and broke away again. Running harder than he ever had, dodging bullets and shouts, Harlan found refuge in a farmhouse. He barricaded himself in an upstairs room with a heavy dresser, where a tense standoff lasted 2 hours. At last, the mob promised him safety and a fair trial if he surrendered. That Sunday, what began as a day of worship ended in blood. Some argued it was self-defense, but the law called it murder. McCready was hauled off to prison for killing the officer. Yet the winds of war were already stirring, and the world would soon learn just how far this mountain man would go in the name of vengeance. Harlan McCready was sentenced to prison in 1858 for slaying the deputy at the church revival. His 10-year sentence might have been the end of his story, but history had other plans. In April of 1861, the Civil War erupted and chaos swept across the land. Men everywhere were forced to choose their loyalties. Communities split, families divided. While McCready sat behind prison walls, war came knocking on his own doorstep. Union troops took control of Clinton County, Kentucky, where his wife and children lived. Among them was the 13th Kentucky Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Aaron Fletcher. One day, as the soldiers passed McCready's house, his 3-year-old boy stood on the porch, waving a little flag. A Union soldier raised his musket, and in a flash, the child was struck down. Moments later, Fletcher and his men stormed the McCready home. They forced Harlan's wife and 12-year-old daughter to cook them a meal, then drove them at bayonet point through the public street for all to see. Humiliated, terrified, and broken, the family endured what no family should. When word of this cruelty reached Harlan, still awaiting parole, something inside him hardened. He was released soon after on the condition that he fight for the Confederacy. But if anyone thought he would retreat quietly, they were sorely mistaken. What was a father to do in the face of such crimes? His heart bled, his spirit boiled. In that moment of anguish, something snapped within Harlan McCready. He swore that the death of his son and the violation of his wife and daughter would cost the Union 100 men. He vowed to hunt down every soldier responsible, Lieutenant Fletcher most of all. He vanished into the Cumberland woods he knew so well. For 4 years, his war was relentless, his vengeance unending. He gathered men to his side and turned the hollers and ridges into killing grounds. Fear spread through the mountains like wildfire. Harlan McCready had been transformed. No longer a farmer, no longer just a man, he was vengeance made flesh. The killings began in November of 1861. Any man who sided with the Union cause soon found himself in McCready's crosshairs, no matter the friendship or kinship that once bound them. One of the first was Thomas Kincaid, an old neighbor and friend. Rumor spread that Kincaid had been supplying Union camps. Harlan rode to his bedside, where the man lay fevered with measles, and sneered, "Reckon you caught that sickness from one of your Yankee friends." Then he drew his pistol and shot him twice in the chest. Weeks later, Harlan confronted Jonah McCall, another local suspected of sympathizing with Union troops. McCready gunned him down in his own front yard, while McCall's wife and daughter screamed in horror. With his first taste of blood behind him, Harlan moved quickly to larger prey. He led a strategic ambush near Sparta, Tennessee, alongside General Horace Devlin's raiders. From the ridges above a narrow hollow, they rained death on Union soldiers as they passed below. In the weeks after, McCready personally executed 4 men who refused to pledge loyalty to the Confederacy. His knowledge of the mountains and his ruthlessness impressed Devlin, who granted him the title of captain. But Harlan McCready was no ordinary captain. He was the first to strike, never giving an enemy the chance to fire back. To save bullets, he often used his massive Bowie knife, which he carried like an extension of his hand. By the war's first year, he had already killed at least 5 men this way, including a boy of 16. By 1862, his reputation spread across Kentucky and Tennessee. To some, Captain McCready was a hero defending Southern honor. To others, he was nothing more than a butcher, a barbarian without conscience. His body count grew steadily, including 10 of the 11 men who had taken part in killing his son and assaulting his wife and daughter. He left behind trails of blood and terror, and his knife took on a grim legend of its own. Rumors spread that Harlan severed the heads of his victims and rolled them down the hills like pumpkins. Mothers whispered warnings to their children, "Don't wander too far, McCready walks the ridges." And everywhere he went, his name carried the taste of fear. By late 1864, one name haunted Union soldiers more than most: Captain Harlan McCready. But despite the trail of blood behind him, there was still one man left on his oath of vengeance: Lieutenant Aaron Fletcher, the officer who had led the raid on his family's home. That chance came at the Battle of Saltville, Virginia. Salt was precious in wartime, used to preserve food, and the mines there were vital to the Confederacy. Union generals Victor Harlan and Marshal Raines led over 5,000 men against just 2,000 Confederates. Against the odds, the rebels triumphed. The Union troops broke, fleeing in chaos and leaving their dead and wounded scattered across the field. The morning after, McCready and his men scoured the battlefield. Instead of taking prisoners, they executed the wounded where they lay, shooting them point blank or cutting them down with cold steel. Witnesses later claimed he walked the rows of bleeding men with calm precision, as though each life ended was a mark erased from his ledger. Then word came Lieutenant Fletcher had been wounded and lay in a field hospital nearby. For McCready, this was destiny. He stormed through the hospital doors, overpowering guards and climbing to the upper floor. Wounded Union soldiers filled the room, their eyes wide with terror as he passed. One by one he put them down, his pistol cracking in the silent ward. At last, at the far end, he found Fletcher. Pale as death, trembling, the lieutenant looked up at the man he had wronged. McCready rested a hand on the butt of his revolver, leaned close, and said, "This here's been waiting for you." He pressed the barrel to Fletcher's head and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the halls. That morning, Harlan McCready completed the oath he had sworn years before. He had promised that his son's death would cost the Union 100 lives. By then, it had cost well over 120. But the war was nearing its end, and with it, McCready's reign of terror would soon unravel. By the war's end, Harlan McCready was the most feared Confederate partisan in the mountains. But when peace came, there was no pardon waiting for him. While thousands of men were allowed to lay down their arms and return home, McCready was offered a false promise. Federal officers told him if he surrendered, he would be pardoned. Instead, he was shackled and placed on trial before a military commission. The court charged him with 53 murders, the only ones they could prove. Witnesses testified about his raids, his executions, his knife work, and the infamous killings after Saltville. Captain McCready stood defiant, insisting he was a soldier fighting a war, not a criminal, but the tribunal rejected his defense. To them, he was not a commissioned officer. He was a guerrilla, an outlaw, a killer outside the laws of war. The verdict was guilty. His sentence was death. On the morning of October 20, 1865, Harlan McCready was led to the gallows in Nashville. A crowd gathered to watch the man whose name had been whispered in fear across Appalachia. He stood tall, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. As the rope was placed around his neck, he spoke his last words. "I am and will die a rebel. Bury me in good rebel soil on my land by the Kafkiller Creek." The trapdoor fell, and with it ended the life of Appalachia's deadliest outlaw. History is written by the victors, and so McCready's name passed into shadow. Some remember him as a ruthless murderer, a monster who butchered without mercy. Others claim he was a father defending his family's honor in a brutal time. His grave lies in the hills of Tennessee, nearly forgotten. So, what do you think? Was Harlan McCready a bloodthirsty killer? Or was he a man who answered the war at his doorstep with the only weapon he had, vengeance,